I never thought my life would turn into something that felt more like a cruel joke than a love story. My name is Rachel Miller. I'm 28 years old, and for the longest time I believed I had been cursed with endless struggles. I was just a single mother working behind the counter at McDonald's trying to scrape together enough to keep the lights on and food on the table for my 5-year-old daughter Chloe. Every shift left me exhausted, my feet aching, my pride quietly bleeding away, as I wore that uniform serving strangers who never saw me as anything more than the waitress. I had grown used to being invisible. Invisible to customers, invisible to the world, even invisible to myself. My only real presence was in Chloe's eyes, the way she looked at me like I was her entire world. And for her, I endured it all. For her, I swallowed the humiliation, the exhaustion, and the loneliness. But then he walked in. Blake Harrison. To the rest of the world, he was untouchable, handsome, powerful, wealthy, beyond imagination. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and instantly owned it, the kind of man who thought the world bent to his will. And to my horror, his eyes landed on me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Men like him didn't notice women like me, or if they did, it was just to amuse themselves before they got bored and moved on. That's why when he started trying to talk to me, asking for coffee, smiling like his attention was a gift, I brushed him off. I'd learned the hard way not to trust smooth words, but he kept coming back. Day after day, he sat at those tables in McDonald's wearing his expensive suits that looked so out of place in a greasy fast food joint waiting for me. Persistent, charming, relentless. And slowly, against my better judgment, I let him in. I didn't know then that I was part of a game. A bet. A cruel dare he had made with his friends that he could marry someone ordinary, someone beneath his world of power and money. That someone was me. But in those early days, I didn't see the game. What I saw was a man who seemed different from everyone else. Someone who looked at me, really looked at me when most people just let their eyes slide past. He asked about Chloe, about my life, about my struggles. And when he proposed so suddenly, so recklessly, it was Chloe's face I thought of. My daughter's future. My daughter's chance at something better. So I said yes. Moving into his mansion felt like stepping into another universe. Everything was polished, grand, overwhelming. Chandeliers glittered above my head, marble floors echoed under my feet, and expensive art hung on the walls like trophies. To Blake, it was just home. To me, it felt like a museum where I didn't belong. And yet, as weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. Blake began to change. I saw glimpses of a man who wasn't just a billionaire CEO, but someone who tried awkwardly, sincerely to be part of my world. He knelt on the floor with Chloe to help with her schoolwork, even when he got all the answers wrong. He laughed when she teased him, smiled when I scolded him, and listened, really listened when I spoke. And for a while I let myself believe in the fairy tale. But fairy tales have a way of rotting from the inside. The first crack came when I learned the truth about my past, the truth I had never expected to hear from his lips. Years earlier, Blake had ordered the closure of the very factory where I once worked, the factory that had given me hope when I was pregnant with Chloe. His decision had cost me everything, my stability, my livelihood, my dignity. That was why I had ended up at McDonald's in the first place. My suffering, my struggle, Chloe's childhood of scarcity, it all traced back to him. I thought I would shatter from the weight of that revelation. How could I share a bed with the man who had unknowingly destroyed my life? How could I let him hold my daughter when he was the reason I had once cried myself to sleep? Not knowing how I'd feed her, I felt betrayed, broken, suffocated by the cruel irony of it all. And yet somehow the deepest wound was still to come. Because even after the truth about the factory, even after the nights of anger and tears, I stayed. I stayed because Blake swore he wanted to make things right. I stayed because Chloe loved him. I stayed because part of me desperately wanted to believe in redemption. But then, like a knife cutting through fragile hope, his friend Caleb showed up one evening and revealed the ugliest truth of all. The bet, the marriage, the humiliation of knowing that I, Rachel Miller, the invisible McDonald's waitress, had been nothing more than a prize to be won. I can't describe the way my heart broke in that moment. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it hollows you out. It makes you question every smile, every touch, every whispered I love you. Was it all a lie? Was I just another notch in Blake Harrison's collection of victories? I left that night, tears blinding me, clutching Chloe's hand as if she were the only anchor I had left. I didn't care about the mansion, the wealth, the promises. All I felt was the echo of his laughter with his friends, mocking me, mocking my life, mocking everything I had endured. And yet, even after everything, the story didn't end there. I remember the sound of Chloe's small footsteps echoing beside mine as we left the mansion that night. My hands were trembling, my vision blurred from tears, but I gripped her hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white. She didn't ask questions, though her big brown eyes searched my face with quiet worry. Children always know even when we think we're protecting them. She knew her mother's heart was breaking. We ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of town. The neon lights flickered through the window, casting our room in a sickly glow. Chloe curled up on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, while I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, trying not to fall apart. Every memory of Blake, his smile, his touch, the way he knelt on the carpet to help Chloe with her math homework played in my mind like a cruel movie. I kept asking myself, was any of it real, or was I living inside his dare all along? The betrayal was more than just personal. It dug into every wound I had carried for years. I thought back to my father who walked out on us when I was 10, swearing he'd come back and never did. To my first boyfriend who vanished the moment I told him I was pregnant. To every customer who had looked at me in my McDonald's uniform like I was nothing. And now Blake, the man I had dared to trust, had cut me deepest of all. Days passed in a haze. I tried to return to work, but even standing behind the counter felt impossible. People whispered. Some recognized me from the headlines, "Billionaire marries waitress in shocking union." Now I was the wife who ran away. The humiliation stung worse than the grease burns on my hands. I wanted to scream at the world that I was more than a joke, more than a dare, more than the punchline to a rich man's cruelty. Blake called, dozens of times. I ignored them. He came to the motel once, pounding on the door, begging me to open it. "Rachel, please," he shouted, his voice raw. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. It started as a dare, yes, but it became real. You became real." I stayed silent, tears streaming down my face as Chloe clung to me. How could I believe him when every promise tasted like ash? He might have convinced himself it was real, but I would never forget the sound of Caleb's laughter, the smugness in his voice when he revealed the truth. I would never forget feeling like a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. And yet, despite my anger, despite my resolve, something inside me ached when I heard Blake's voice crack on the other side of that door. I hated him. I missed him. I wanted him to hurt the way I hurt. I wanted him to prove he wasn't just another man who used me and left me broken. Weeks turned into months. Chloe and I found a small apartment, nothing like the mansion, but at least it was ours. I picked up shifts at a diner, working double to cover rent. Life returned to its gray rhythm, except for the nights when I lay awake haunted by what might have been. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed Blake not in his suit, not in the mansion, but standing in front of a shuttered factory. The very factory where I had once worked. The letter read, "I destroyed your life once without knowing it. I'll spend the rest of mine making it right. Come see for yourself." I almost tore it up. Almost. But something about that photograph, about the look on his face, made me pause. For the first time, Blake looked small, human. The next weekend, against my better judgment, I took Chloe by the hand and we went. The factory was no longer silent and abandoned. Workers filled the space machines, hummed, and fresh paint covered the walls. Blake had reopened it, hiring back as many of the old employees as he could find. When he saw me standing there, his expression broke into something raw and unguarded. "I did this for you," he said softly. "For Chloe. For every night you cried because of me. I can't erase the dare, Rachel. I can't erase my mistakes, but I can prove to you that I am not that man anymore." My throat tightened. For a moment, I almost believed him, but redemption is not so simple and forgiveness is not so cheap. Because even as I stood there watching the factory come alive again, I knew there were secrets Blake still hadn't told me, and the day I uncovered them would change everything all over again. I stood there in the factory, Chloe's small hand tucked into mine, the hum of machines surrounding us like a heartbeat I didn't know whether to trust. Workers nodded respectfully to Blake as he passed, their faces lined with gratitude, some even relief. It was clear he had invested more than money. He had given these people their lives back. And yet, I couldn't shake the cold ache in my chest. How could the same man who had once gambled with my dignity now stand before me trying to wear the mask of a savior? That night after we returned to our apartment, I tucked Chloe into bed. She looked up at me, her innocent eyes wide. "Mommy, is he a good man now?" I froze. How could I explain to her the layers of betrayal, the scars of humiliation, the weight of secrets I could feel pressing down on us? I kissed her forehead and whispered, "He's trying, sweetheart." But trying doesn't erase the hurt. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the table staring at the photograph Blake had sent, the one of him standing outside the factory. The way he looked at the shuttered building, as if he had been staring at his own failures, haunted me. My mind wavered between fury and longing. I hated him for what he had done. But part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to believe love could grow even from the ugliest soil. The next week he found me again. This time, not at the apartment, but at the diner, where I had taken a late-night shift. He slid into a booth, still in his tailored suit, but with eyes that carried sleepless nights. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I didn't see him, but he spoke before I could. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "I never meant for you to be hurt like this. The dare was cruel and I was arrogant. But when I met you, when I saw you with Chloe, it stopped being a joke. It became the only thing that felt real in my life." I slammed the coffee pot down harder than I meant to, the clatter drawing stares from other customers. "Real, you call humiliating me in front of the world. Real, you call gambling with my heart real." He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. "No. I call the nights I held Chloe while she fell asleep real. I call the mornings I woke up and saw you, hair tangled, face tired, but still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, that was real. The dare was the beginning, but you became the truth." For a moment his words pierced me, dangerous in their tenderness. But then I remembered Evelyn's smirk, Caleb's mocking laughter, the endless nights I had spent thinking I was nothing more than a pawn. "Words aren't enough, Blake," I whispered. "You can't erase betrayal with flowers and factories. Trust doesn't grow back like that." He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his features. "Then let me prove it. Not just to you, but to Chloe. Give me one chance to show I can be the man you both deserve." I walked away from him that night, my heart raging in two directions. One toward the safety of anger, the other toward the terrifying possibility of forgiveness. But the choice was ripped from me before I could make it. A week later, as I was closing up the diner, Evelyn herself walked in. She looked every inch the polished socialite heels clicking against the floor, diamond earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. "You really thought he changed, didn't you?" she purred, leaning on the counter. "You think men like Blake Harrison just wake up one morning and decide to become saints?" My stomach tightened. "What do you want?" She leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. "To tell you the truth, the dare may have started the game, but you weren't the only prize. There are more bets, Rachel, more secrets. And if you stay, you'll discover just how deep his betrayal runs." Her words clung to me like smoke, leaving me choking on doubt. I wanted to dismiss her, to believe she was lying just to wound me. But in my gut, I knew she wasn't bluffing. There were truths Blake still hadn't confessed, shadows still hiding behind his attempts at redemption. And the day I uncovered them, I would have to decide if love could survive the deepest betrayal of all, or if it was time to burn everything to the ground. I went home that night, shaking, Evelyn's words rattling inside me like stones in a jar. Chloe was asleep, her little body curled under the thin blanket, clutching that worn-out stuffed rabbit. I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a stray curl from her face, and my chest ached with both love and fear. She deserved a mother who could protect her, from lies and cruelty. But how could I protect her if I wasn't even sure what kind of monster or man Blake really was? The next morning, I decided I couldn't just sit in silence anymore. I needed answers, the kind Blake hadn't been willing to give me. I called him, my voice steady even though my heart pounded. Meet me. No excuses. Tonight. We met in the mansion's library, a room that smelled of leather and dust, filled with shelves of books that had probably never been read. He was already there when I arrived, waiting with a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked tired, the sharpness of his suit unable to hide the shadows under his eyes. I didn't sit. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, every ounce of my anger and pain keeping me upright. Tell me the truth, I demanded. All of it. No more half confessions, no more pretty words. I deserve to know what I married into. For a long moment he just stared at me, the silence stretching until I thought he might refuse. Then he set the glass down, his hands trembling just slightly. You want the truth? Fine. The dare was real. I was arrogant, careless, cruel. I thought it would be nothing more than a joke. But when I saw you, when I spoke to you, it stopped being a game for me. That part, Rachel, I swear was real. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to break. And Evelyn, Caleb, the rest of your friends, what else did they dare you into? What else haven't you told me? His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with shame. They bet I couldn't last a year. That I'd get bored, that you'd walk out, that it would all collapse. They laughed at me every time I defended you. And I let it go on because I thought proving them wrong would somehow prove my feelings right. The words cut through me like knives. I pressed a hand to my chest as though I could hold myself together while everything inside me splintered. So I was never just your wife, I whispered. I was a spectacle, a wager, a joke shared over expensive wine. He stood then, crossing the room as if he could close the gulf between us, but I stepped back. His eyes pleaded with me. Rachel, listen to me. It started that way, yes. But I swear to you, I fell in love with you. With Chloe. With the family I never thought I could have. You are not a joke to me, you are the only real thing in my life. Tears burned hot in my eyes, blurring his face. I wanted so desperately to believe him, but Evelyn's venom still lingered in my ears. There are more bets, Rachel. More secrets. Could love survive if it was built on lies, no matter how real it felt now? I left that night without giving him an answer. I needed time-space clarity. I needed to breathe without drowning in doubt. But clarity came in the cruelest way. A week later, Chloe came home from school clutching a magazine she had found in the library. On the cover was a photograph of Blake laughing with Caleb at some party, the headline screaming, "Billionaire's bet, how a dare turned into a marriage scandal." I froze, the words searing into me. Chloe's little voice trembled. Mommy, are they talking about you? I took the magazine from her trembling hands and hid it away. But the damage was done. My daughter had seen the truth I had been trying so hard to shield her from. My shame was no longer just mine, it was hers too. That night I cried harder than I had in years, muffling my sobs into my pillow so Chloe wouldn't hear. I realized then that no matter what Blake said, no matter how much he swore he had changed the world, would never let me forget that I had once been a dare. And yet, deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because when humiliation becomes unbearable, when betrayal festers into something sharper, a new force is born. Revenge. Revenge. The word tasted bitter yet powerful as it curled in my chest that night. I had spent months drowning in humiliation, in whispered gossip, in the memory of Blake's friends laughing at my expense. But as I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of our apartment, I realized something. I was done being their joke. I wasn't just a poor waitress they could toy with. I was a mother, a woman, someone who had survived too much to be broken forever. The first step wasn't anger, it was silence. I stopped answering Blake's calls. I ignored the flowers, the letters, the desperate attempts to reach me. I knew silence hurt him more than screaming ever could. But privately, I started to plan. I began gathering every piece of evidence, every article, every photo I could find about that night, the bet that ruined my dignity. If the world wanted to laugh at me, then I would show them who was truly the fool. Then came Evelyn. She found me again, this time outside the school where Chloe was playing on the swings. Her heels sank into the gravel, but her smile was still sharp as glass. "You see, he'll never escape it, Rachel. Neither will you. Unless—" She paused, tilting her head. "Unless you help me bring him down." My stomach twisted. Evelyn had her own motives, of course. She wanted Blake's empire for herself. But her words echoed something inside me I hadn't dared admit. Part of me wanted to watch him fall too, to make him feel the shame he had so carelessly forced onto me. I didn't answer her then. But that night I stared at Chloe sleeping peacefully, her small hand resting on her stuffed rabbit, and I thought about the future. Did I want her to grow up seeing her mother as weak as the woman who had been humiliated and never fought back? Or did I want her to see me as someone who stood tall, who refused to be erased by betrayal? So I agreed to meet Evelyn in secret. We met in a dim cafe far from the glittering lights of Blake's world. She came draped in furs, her diamonds catching the low light while I wore my plain jacket and kept my head down. "He trusts you," she said smoothly, stirring her coffee, though she never drank it. "If you give me what I need, we can expose him once and for all." Her plan was simple: ruin Blake, publicly strip him of his empire, and leave him crawling in the ashes. She wanted me to testify, to tell the world about the dare, the humiliation, the cruel bet that began it all. Part of me recoiled at the thought. Another part leaned in closer. But something in her eyes unsettled me. It wasn't justice she wanted. It wasn't truth. It was power. And I knew then that aligning myself with Evelyn would only drag me deeper into the shadows. Still, I left the cafe with my heart torn in two. On one hand, I longed for revenge. On the other, I feared becoming as cold and ruthless as the people who had wronged me. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of choice pressed heavier on me. Blake came one evening unannounced, standing outside my apartment in the pouring rain. His suit clung to him, his eyes raw, stripped of arrogance. "Rachel," he begged, his voice breaking, "don't let Evelyn use you. Don't let her poison what we had. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't let her win. Don't." I stood at the window, Chloe asleep in the next room, and I watched him. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He didn't look like the man who had once made me a dare. He just looked human, broken. And in that moment, I realized my revenge wasn't about Evelyn or the world, or even Blake. It was about me. About reclaiming the voice I had lost, the dignity they had stolen. The only question left was whether I could carve that path without destroying myself in the process. Because the final secret Blake was still hiding, the one Evelyn had only hinted at, was about to surface. And when it did, I would be forced to choose between the ruins of revenge or the fragile, dangerous hope of love. The secret came to me not through Evelyn, not through Caleb, not even through Blake himself, but through an envelope slipped under my apartment door one gray morning. No return address, no handwriting. I recognized just my name. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, afraid of what truth might be waiting inside. Inside was a single document, a copy of Blake's will recently updated. And in it, one line stood out like a wound on a page. "To Rachel Miller and her daughter Chloe, I leave majority shares of Harrison Industries." My breath caught. My daughter's name, our names written into the empire that had once been built on my humiliation. And suddenly, the whispers, the stares, the relentless persistence from Blake made sense. He wasn't just fighting for me. He was fighting to make Chloe part of his world, to give her what I had never been able to: security, power, a future untouched by poverty. But it didn't feel like a gift, it felt like a trap. That evening I went to him. He opened the door, his eyes weary but hopeful, as if he had been waiting for me to come all along. I held up the will. "You think this fixes everything? That writing Chloe's name on a piece of paper erases the bet, the lies, the shame?" He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "No, I know it doesn't erase anything, but it's the only way I know to prove that I'm not playing games anymore. That you and Chloe, you're not a dare, not a joke. You're my family, the only family I want." Tears stung my eyes, not from his words, but from the war inside me. Part of me wanted to believe him, to let myself fall into the promise of a life where Chloe would never have to struggle like I did. But another part screamed that trust built on betrayal is a house built on sand. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "You broke me, Blake. You turned my life into entertainment for your friends. And no matter how much you rebuild, that scar will always remain. Do you understand that? His eyes glistened, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, and I'll carry that scar with you for the rest of my life if you'll let me. I looked at him for a long time, at the man who had once been my greatest humiliation and had somehow become my greatest ache. I didn't have an answer that night. I only had the certainty that my life, Chloe's life, would never again be defined by his dare or anyone else's. In the weeks that followed, I chose not silence, not revenge, but something sharper: truth. I told my story publicly, not for Evelyn, not even for Blake, but for myself. I stood before cameras and confessed everything: the dare, the betrayal, the nights of shame, and the mornings of resilience. I bared the wounds that had nearly destroyed me. And to my surprise, the world listened. I was no longer the waitress or the bet. I was Rachel Miller, a woman who had survived humiliation and found the courage to stand. And though Blake stood beside me, quiet and unflinching as the storm raged, I knew the choice to forgive him or not would be mine alone. Even now, I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. Love doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't heal wounds overnight. But it can grow around scars, fragile and stubborn if you let it. And maybe that's what redemption really is: not perfection, but persistence. So if you're listening to my story tonight, maybe broken in your own way, maybe carrying your own scars, I want you to know this: you are more than anyone's bet, anyone's joke, anyone's dare. You are not defined by the people who tried to break you. You are defined by the way you rise. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, so these lessons of betrayal, revenge, and hard-won hope can reach others who need them. And tell me in the comments what scars have made you stronger.